I'm sorry, I couldn't resist making that joke. Hello everybody, I am PhenomSage, and finally, welcome back to the Made in Abyss manga reviews. Now here's the deal with today's video. I had originally intended to record this yesterday and get this up to you yesterday, and then do the chapter 27 review today. But unfortunately that's not how life works, and now I'm doing this today, and I'm going to try and get the chapter 27 review up tomorrow. So hopefully you guys are all okay with that. Originally I was actually intending to include these manga comparisons or these manga differences in the chapter 27 review, but while reading through every single chapter up till where the anime left off, there was just way too much to talk about, so I decided to make a separate video discussing all the differences that I saw that were worth pointing out. Just as a quick note, do not watch this video expecting a concrete, just extensive list of every single difference from the manga to the anime, and vice versa. It's not that at all. This is only for the people who followed my reviews and want to hear my thoughts on some of the differences. And on this list, I've only included ones that I have not already been told while doing my reviews. That means no censorship notes, no Ozen fight comparisons. I've been there, I've done that, we're good there. I don't need to reiterate those points that I already made in my anime reviews. There will be a few exceptions to that, but for the most part, I'm going to keep it to things I didn't know just because they really stood out to me because nobody bothered telling me these things. Alright, that's not true. People bothered telling me some of these things, but others I had no idea about, which made them really exciting to find out while I was reading. Also, before we begin, I have some very cool news to talk about. Made in Abyss has just been blowing up on Mal. The anime is about to enter the top 20 of all time as soon as Pingu gets out of the fucking way. But not just that, the manga readers have really bumped up that manga score, and it is close. It is just 1 decimal point away from entering the top 5 manga of all time. Unfortunately, my love One Piece had to sacrifice itself to get Made in Abyss to this level. But that is just crazy cool news. It is awesome to see this series getting the attention it deserves now. Remember at the beginning of the season when nobody was watching this? I remember. And I'm really happy that now, if you look on Mal, it is one of the highest viewed shows and one of the biggest communities from summer 2017 season. Anyways, I just thought that was cool. I thought I'd mention it just because it surprised me that this series has been blowing up as much as it has, but I'm just really happy that it is. Without further ado, let's get into these manga comparisons. Just a warning, some of these will be just quick notes that I thought were interesting, while others will be things that I have a few things to say about. So it's not like I have some extensive notes to talk about on each one, but some were just too interesting, or in some cases funny enough to talk about. Starting off in chapter 1, I was actually told this while I was reviewing the series, but I figured I'd mention it in this video. This is one of the exceptions I will make. In the beginning of my reviews, when Riko lost the star compass, I was like, what the? Did she just lose that? Wasn't that really important? And everybody just kind of shrugged it off. They were like, no, it's really not that big of a deal. I'm like, what does it do though? Like, was it anything important? And I was told a few times that Riko actually made up uses for the star compass. She even didn't know what it did. And it's true, in the manga you see cuts of her explaining different uses for the star compass, probably all inaccurate, and at this point I'm wondering if even it pointing to the bottom of the abyss was accurate. Later in that same chapter we get some exposition on the finding of the abyss, and what we see here really surprised me because we had no mention of this in any of the episodes. Airships apparently exist in this universe, and while that's not inherently surprising to this world, it's more so surprising that we never saw any in the anime. Like, no mention of anything like this. We saw a ship in the third layer, which I will get into that shortly, but it's really surprising to me that we never found out the existence of airships in this universe during the anime. Later in chapter 1, we have Riko exclaiming to Shiggy that she will become a White Whistle, and now I'm starting to get why you guys knew about the scaled umbrella ahead of time, because in the anime, that was never brought up at all. That we knew that Riko was snagging relics, but we didn't know specifically which ones she had other than the Star Compass. But in this, we can see her talking about each one that she's stolen: the Star Compass, the Scale Umbrella, and the Sun Orb. And what's really interesting is that the Sun Orb has never been mentioned in the anime. Now, this could be for two reasons. One, there was just no important plot element regarding this, or what I have a theory on what happened to this. It's not explicitly stated, but it's very clearly shown later on, and I will talk about that when we get to it, but I just thought it was interesting that the Sun Orb was never mentioned. But if my theory is correct, I know exactly why it wasn't mentioned. Also, I find it funny that Riko only snagged the relics that are considered just the worthless, just grade 4 relics. Moving along to chapter 2, we get our first example of something the manga does that the anime doesn't do, and that's give us a detailed, zoomed in analysis of the map of the abyss where Riko is. We see various locations that are never even named in the anime, like the Starry Hill, or the Fossil Group by Treehouse, or the Weeping Wind Windmill, or the Burial Tower. I kind of wish they found a way to integrate these maps into the anime, because they do add a lot more depth and world building to these layers that we normally wouldn't even see. Like, we never go to these places, but just knowing that they're there and they're named adds a lot to a world, in my opinion. And it continues doing this on each layer, which is really cool. There are some especially cool places on layer 2 and layer 4 that I saw that we never even end up going to. The end of chapter 3 is where we start getting into the bigger changes that start affecting the structure and the plot. Obviously, this being as faithful of an adaptation as it was, nothing too much was changed, but these first 8 chapters where they leave for the abyss are actually restructured around a lot, and it's cool the way that the anime actually restructured things and moved some scenes around to work better flowing as an episode. But one scene in the beginning that was anime original that I had no idea was anime original, nobody told me, is the end of episode 1 where we get our first look at the abyss with Reg and Riko next to the windmill. Iconic ending of a scene, such a great end. That scene is anime original. In the manga, when Riko comes back and starts talking to Reg after she's escaped from Leader just comes right back and takes her away again. It's pretty funny the way that they did it, but the anime original scene in the first episode actually works really well with this, just assuming that Leader didn't catch her again. So I just wanted to say that was really well done in the anime. Moving on quite a bit to chapter 5. In the anime, if you watched my episode 2 review, you'll know that I had a problem with a few aspects of the Resurrection Festival. I will say that even though the way that they reordered things in the anime worked well for episodes 1 and 3, I feel like the structure in the manga actually helped my appreciation for the Resurrection Festival, and the flaws that I had in episode 2 were far lesser when I read the manga as opposed to watching that episode. In that episode, you'll recall that I had somewhat of a problem with Liza being addressed as the strongest White Whistle, or I think the translation just straight up referred to her as the best White Whistle. It was either the strongest or the best, and either of them I'm not a fan of. I just felt like it was unnecessary to have the focus be on the strongest one right off the bat. I feel like that limits the character and world building that you can do with other White Whistles, and it felt somewhat contrived to me. But in the manga, the translation is actually that she was just the bravest one. And knowing about Liza's character now, that completely fits and that completely works with her character. So I like that translation a lot more, and on second thought, I don't think that Liza was referred to as the strongest because later on they refer to Ozen as the strongest, but I know that they did not call her the bravest in the episode. I feel like that translation would have helped my enjoyment of that section a lot more, which I know it seems like a nitpick, it is, but still. In that same chapter, we actually see that the play or the presentation that occurred for the Resurrection Festival actually got a bit more screen time and a bit more focus than it did in the anime. It's nothing crazy, it's just a few more shots of Reg and Nat throwing up petals. But one thing that is shown in this that isn't shown in the anime is that this presenter is not a very nice person. He comes across as such a nice little Igor character in the anime, and then in this, you just get this terrifying shot of him yelling at Reg and Nat when they're not throwing up the petals. Oh, and Shiggy too. And one final detail that I thought was really interesting that I'd never noticed until Shiggy pointed it out is that Liza's whistle actually has an eternal fortune on it. Like, I knew it was a flower, I knew it was like some fancy design, but I never put two and two together that it was an eternal fortune on her whistle. So that's just a really cool detail that I thought was interesting. Moving on to Leader's exposition dump on Riko's origins and why she's still alive right now, we get a little piece of information that wasn't explained in this same scene in the anime. We knew that Liza's husband Torka had died in the fourth layer, but Leader makes it a point to say that the fourth layer's curse bleeding from every orifice indirectly killed Torka. Now here's my question, what does indirectly mean? Is it that he was suffering from that when the foreign cave raiders attacked them and that's why he couldn't defend himself and he ended up dying? Or did the curse actually end up killing him after he was already attacked? I think there's a lot of speculation there that can be made, but I'm going to assume that the foreign cave raiders did kill him. It's just that it was easier for them to kill him because he was already suffering from the fourth layer's curse. Boobstone! Oh, sorry. Don't know where that came from. In the episode review, when Reg is digging up with Nat in the first layer on his first expedition, he finds these weird squishy rock bags of whatever that he just squishes over and over. He's like, this is so cool, what is this? And he finds a lot of them, and at this point I'm like, what are these things? What are they for? Are these important? And we never got that answer in the anime. They kind of skipped over this entire scene in the manga where Reg and Nat bring their relics to the appraiser and he lets them know what they are. And while this wasn't really a necessary scene to include, I think it would have been nice to include this just to see the process of bringing relics from the abyss, getting them appraised, and then going back home. But at the appraisal, we actually see that these things are called a princess bosom, or he just calls them a boobstone. And I'm guessing they're worthless, but I just thought this was funny that they added this in. And Reg, of course, being as innocent as he is, has this reaction. As Shiggy is explaining the different layers and the dangers of each layer, when he gets to the inverted forest and starts talking about the very strong gusts of wind, we actually hear about a story that isn't brought up in the anime about a foreigner who tried to bring an airship into the abyss, but was attacked and the ship just fell down into the abyss. Now here's my question. Is that the same ship that we see in the third layer that's stuck in the rock wall? I don't think it's too far-fetched to say that it might be. Later on in the manga, they actually call it a pirate ship when they get to it in the third layer, so it could be a different ship entirely, but I don't think it's too unlikely to assume that this might be the same airship that fell down from the second layer. I mean, it's right in the same spot. Later on in the explanation, when we get to the fifth layer, the Sea of Corpses, Shiggy gives a more in-depth explanation on what this layer is and how do we even get to the sixth layer in the first place. Apparently the sea of the Sea of Corpses is a body of water that's residing on top of another body of water. It's just muddier. And the only way to make it into the sixth layer is to either dive into the water and go down that way, or just go off the waterfall. So considering the Sea of Corpses is coming up right as where we are in the manga, this is going to be really interesting to see how they approach this situation. Also, Shiggy actually mentions the seventh layer, the final maelstrom, something that we don't even hear about in the anime. Cutting to the very emotional farewell with Riko and Reg descending into the abyss and saying their goodbyes to Nat and Shiggy. There was a nice little added touch in the manga that I really appreciated that wasn't in the anime. As we know, it was only when Nat started breaking down when Riko actually started to cry and show some emotion. Before that, she was very upbeat, very enthusiastic, saying, "Thank you, Nat. There's no way we would have made it here without you." But in the manga, a really nice touch that I love is that as she's saying this, you can actually see her starting to cry as well. She's having a hard time pulling it together as well. It's not just Nat breaking down that causes her to react that way. Like, she is very emotional at this point as well. So I really enjoyed that little added detail there. Jumping ahead quite a bit to chapter 11, as Rico's snatched by the corpse sweeper, you can actually see Reg aiming for it, and there's a nice little visual diagram to show him aiming for it with a cube around the corpse sweeper to signify that Reg is aiming directly for any part of its body to get it to let go of Rico. So I don't know, I just thought that was a cool little added detail. On top of that though, in this scene, in the anime, we get a few shots of Rico looking back down at Reg, and you can slowly see her start to slip away because of the curse, and her starting to vomit and lose consciousness. But in the manga, during this scene, we never actually cut to Rico. It's all from Reg's point of view. I think that's a really interesting directorial choice, and I wonder which one worked better for me. I wonder if it was cool never seeing Rico and only seeing it from Reg's point of view and wondering what she's going through up there, or if it was better actually seeing what she's going through with these close-ups and seeing her vomit and stuff. Let me know what you think about that. I enjoyed both takes, so I'm okay with either, but I think it's interesting how those two scenarios differed. During these manga differences, I also want to showcase when the anime actually did something better, I feel, than the manga. And in this scene where we see Reg and Rico in the inverted forest, I felt like the transition between them eating to this predicament where they're on top of the inverted forest trees with the gusts just blowing them back. I feel like the transition was done much better in the anime. We get a nice little montage of them climbing down, finally reaching the inverted forest, whereas in the manga, we just straight up cut from them eating to being in the inverted forest. And this isn't as jarring as a certain transition later on in the manga, but it's still would have been nice to have a little bit of a gap fill in between them being in the inverted forest and them eating. Now, this is a really fun difference that somebody mentioned to me way back in when I was doing my Seeker Camp reviews, and this is completely glossed over in the anime, but I love this shot in the manga. When Riko's inquiring about Ozen, she says, even though she looks scary, she is a great master, isn't she? And in the anime, Marlock just says, yeah, she is. But in the manga, you can see just this one frame of her just staring blankly, just thinking about that for a second, and then saying, yes, truly. And that clearly implies that there's more than meets the eye to Ozen and how she treats Marlock. I mean, by the end of this arc, we can tell that she does treat Marlock well, but of course there's more going on with this than we see. We see later on that she has some very messed up punishments. So it's not like that reveals anything new to us at this point, but I just thought that was a really nice detail that I wish was in the anime but wasn't. So for this next one, this is about as speculative as speculation gets, but I needed to mention it, and this was actually in the anime too, so this isn't a manga difference. It's more so that I didn't mention this in my review, and with information that we have now, I wanted to mention this. Notice how she says to Ozen at the very end, your personality's irredeemable, but you're the best mentor ever. Anything seem familiar to you there? Now, at first I thought this was just a coincidence and that maybe irredeemable was just the go-to word in this Made in Abyss universe, because Ozen says it, Liza says it, and Reg says it non-stop. Now here's what I'm thinking. Ozen has only said this one time when Reg and Rico are departing for the third layer, and she's reminiscing about Liza. So it's natural to assume that maybe she's saying that because of how Liza said it in the past. So why does Reg say it so much? Well, later on in the series, we find out that Reg could have potentially been traveling with Liza that entire time. And due to being the child that he is, I don't think it's that far-fetched to assume that maybe his use of the word irredeemable came from being under Liza and traveling with Liza. Maybe Liza is the origin of irredeemable. Now, what does that mean for the future of the story and these characters? Well, nothing. But I just thought that was interesting to note, so I did. Now, when Ozen was explaining the time dilation between being in the abyss and being on the surface, I had a lot of questions about this, and a lot of you answered in different ways, because it really isn't made clear at all on what she means by this. There is still no concrete information on whether or not it's all in your head or if time actually is passing. And Ozan even says this herself. She says, me and Liza actually wondered whether or not time was passing while we were down there or if it was just in our head. But a bit more information is given by Ozan in the form of a diagram that just wouldn't naturally flow in an anime episode. We see that a rough estimation of Ozan's time dilation is on the 5th layer. 2 weeks equates to a few months on the surface. And she even says that the time passing is especially severe on the 5th layer and downwards. So that's just a bit more information to go along with our knowledge about the way time passes down in the abyss. And I was actually told this while doing my reviews, but I figured I should mention this part because this could come into play later on down on the 5th layer and below. Skipping ahead to Riko and Reg's descent down into the 3rd layer, we all knew watching that episode that it was anime only. I talked about this extensively in the episode review, and even comments told me the exact point on where it cuts off, and now after reading this chapter, I know what they did to avoid going through all of that anime original stuff. Also, just as a side note, after reading this chapter, I really appreciate the way that they added a lot more depth and complexity to the 3rd layer than what was originally there in the manga. In the manga, the Crimson Splitjaw confronts Riko and Reg immediately as they enter the pirate ship, and it is also defeated swiftly. There's no running away segment. Reg doesn't use his incinerator on the Madoka Jack. None of that happened. Reg just pulls some fancy melee combat moves and ends up defeating this guy. But not without the help of Riko, and this is where the main difference that I want to bring up comes in. The Crimson Splitjaw has an attachment to relics, so what Riko does is she tosses a relic in the air to distract it. But my question here is, what is that relic? You can clearly see in one panel that Reg is blinded by the relic and has to look away for a second. And it's not explicitly said what relic this is, but you can infer based on what I said earlier and what was said by Riko earlier, that this is the unmentioned sun orb that never came up in the anime, and it makes sense why it never came up because this situation never had to happen. It's interesting that they don't call it the sun orb in this scene. They don't let you know that it is the sun orb, but due to it blinding Reg, I have a feeling it is the sun orb, and that's why we just never heard of it. This would also remove all of the previous relics that Riko brought in, the star compass, the scaled umbrella, and now the sun orb. So I thought that was interesting. Let me know what you think that was, if that was the sun orb or not. Maybe it was explicitly stated somewhere else, but that makes sense to me, so that's what I'm saying. Now, during the iconic, now iconic, Riko bleeding out scene on the 4th layer, there's a nice detail added in the manga that the anime tried to convey in the episode, but it did not come across the way it comes across in the manga. As Riko is laying down, starting to feel the effects of the 4th layer's curse, you can see her start to hallucinate and talk about the poison coming out of her hand, maybe because of the curse, and saying it doesn't hurt. And during this whole scene, you can tell she's hallucinating about what's going on, the fact that it does hurt, and that she's bleeding heavily. And the reason this scene works so well is that you can tell she's hallucinating, and these are all of her thoughts. Now, this leads to a slight error, I feel like, in the anime episode, trying to translate this scene. In the episode, you do get a few cuts of Riko hallucinating from her POV, but nothing looks the way it does like it does in this manga panel. And in fact, they actually give Reg 2 of the lines that Riko says in this panel right here about how does the curse of the abyss only drain out the blood after it's drawn out the poison. In the manga, this is clearly shown as Riko's thoughts, but they give it to Reg in the anime instead, which confused me, and it confuses this entire sequence of events, like what's happening is actually happening and Reg is actually saying those lines. Whereas in the manga, it's clear that Reg is not saying those lines, which makes it even more confusing in the following scene, where Reg is saying, oh god, she's hallucinating now. If she was hallucinating, Reg, you never would have said that. So I thought that was done better in the manga than it was conveyed in the anime. A few commenters actually pointed out that that whole scene was a hallucination, but I never would have realized that unless I had read the manga panels here. In short, Rico was being delusional that entire time because of the curse, and they weren't showing exactly what was going on until they switched to Reg's POV. After meeting with Nanachi, during her explanation about Midi and why she is the way she is, and about the cave delvers, we actually get a really interesting piece of translation that I don't remember being in the episode where she said all this, that ties back to something that Ozen said back at Seeker Camp. Ozen said to Reg that he must not exist because knowing that there's something here that can so easily make it down and then make it back up from the abyss would ruin the value of relics as a whole, and also deter the faith that these cave delvers have in the abyss as just this mysterious and monstrous place that you have to have the courage to take on. It's said multiple times that cave delvers believe in the abyss as a god. And during this Nanachi conversation, we have a piece of dialogue that resembles exactly what Ozen said, where she says that she is the very proof that humanity has the possibility to survive returning from the 6th layer. And that is why that they would want to capture her. I think that ties directly back into what Ozen was saying about how if something like that was proven, that faith in the abyss would waver and the value of relics would start to decline. This difference isn't really all that interesting, but I thought it was an entertaining addition to what this manga is, and I figured I'd mention it just because it's funny. Every time that Reg eats a piece of food, and I don't think it's just exclusively tied to Reg, but Reg is just always there. Every time you see the food, the manga makes a little note that shows what the appearance looks like and then what it tastes like. And these manga notes are always funny for what it appears to be and what the taste actually is. So I figured I'd make a mention of that just because I thought it was an entertaining addition that isn't really said in the anime at all. Now, earlier I spoke of a transition that just kind of abruptly cut to the inverted forest after Rico and Reg had finished eating, but that has nothing on this transition in this part right here in Nanachi's flashback. This was brought to my attention during the hour-long finale review that I did, and I wanted to cover it here just because it's so weird. During the flashback, as Nanachi is spying on Bondrewd and finds out of his true intentions and what he's been doing to the children, Nanachi is immediately scared for Midi and what he's doing to her at this moment, so she runs off and she says, "Where are you, Midi?" And the very next page, we just see the two of them trapped in the elevator. There's no transition, there's no Bondrewd finding her and putting her in the elevator, and it almost makes me wonder if we're missing a page here. I think we're missing a page because this just feels too abrupt and too off from the previous panel to make sense. Even Bondrewd is talking as if he had already said something beforehand, so I am convinced that we are missing a page from the manga here, and that's why it just cuts to them in an elevator. Otherwise, if not, I feel like the anime handled the transition between Nanachi running for Midi and actually being in the elevator much better. As Nanachi is carrying Midi away from Bondrewd's lair, from the 5th layer, we saw this flashback in the anime, and we saw Nanachi very desperate, saying that she'll figure something out. The main difference I want to get across here is just how much more emotional Nanachi looks in the manga than she does in the anime. I very much prefer the way she's drawn here. You can see that she's just broken. She has no hope left, and I think it fits her situation here better than the more determined look that she has in the anime. Not to mention the fact that you can barely see her tearing up in the anime, whereas in the manga you can tell she's sobbing because she's so sad. I think this panel just conveys the emotion in this scene a lot better. One very powerful change that I feel like should have been in the anime but wasn't, and I have no idea why they didn't adapt this, because this made Nanachi as a character more endearing, and it just added a lot more levity to the scene. After Nanachi asks Reg to kill Midi for her, of course Reg says, "Just let me think about it for a little bit." And in the anime, there's no hesitation, there's no real pause. She's just like, "Alright, whatever, of course. Sorry for asking you such a weird thing. Go ahead." But in the manga, when she hears Reg say, let me think about it, just thinking about the possibility that he could say no to her last chance to kill Mitty. There's a very powerful, and it's not even that big of a frame, of Nanachi just looking hopeless. You can see her mentally break down in that panel before regaining her composure and saying, of course, do what you need to. And I think that would have added so much more if they'd included that in the episode itself, and it's a shame they didn't, but in the manga that is just very powerful, and it makes me love Nanachi as a character just that much more, that she was hurting that much, that she broke down there, but still respected Reg and let him make his decision. Nanachi as a character is just very strong-willed and very respectable. I love her so much. Now, what was originally used for the anime as the final scene of the finale is actually put in right as Reg kills Mitty in the chapter. Bondrewd sees that Nanachi has finally been able to kill Mitty and congratulates her, but there's a lot more detail added to the scene, and I wonder why they didn't choose to include some of these aspects. For one, it's just a beautiful fucking picture. It is ridiculous how well drawn, and the atmosphere and the tone that is conveyed through this art, it is just so well done. But two, and I did not mention this in my review because it was obscured in the anime, but they highlight it very well in this shot. Bondrewd has a tail now. He has a tail, and there is so much you can speculate from this. I assume he's been experimenting on himself to be able to endure the 6th layer and come back. Maybe he already can, I don't know, but that's something I should definitely mention because I noticed that after rewatching, after we had done our review. And second, we see a little bit under his mask. You can see him taking off his mask a little bit, and you can see his eyes. And he almost looks like an alien. He looks otherworldly. I am convinced he is not human anymore. I would expect that he is a lizard human, like Nanachi is a, I don't even know what Nanachi is. But you can tell that Bondrewd is an animal human. He is not just human anymore. So I really like this cut here. I kind of wish, even if they obscured the tail, that we just see that shot of under his mask. That would have been awesome. So I really like this manga difference here, and it gets me excited for Bondrewd's arc coming up. And for the final difference, the final comparison from manga to anime, and this one might seem like a joke, but there's actually a lot of development that can be seen from this. In the hot springs, while Riko and Reg are in the spring naked together, Riko is very chill, she's very calm about it. She's like, yeah, let's just go in together, who cares? And they kind of leave it at that. Even when Riko points out, hey, Reg, your penis, what happened to it? She stays calm and she stays collected, as if still considering Reg a robot that she obviously wouldn't have feelings for. But in the manga, when she points that out and Reg gets so embarrassed, he's like, this is just terrible, I'm so sorry. The reaction Riko has is the most human reaction and the most feelings Riko has ever conveyed toward Reg in the whole series so far. She is visibly embarrassed and visibly flustered, and to me what this signifies is that Riko is starting to view Reg more as a human than as a robot. Meaning, the ship will sail. Alright guys, that's been all from me for this very lengthy manga comparisons review. I did not expect it to go this long, but there was just so much I wanted to talk about, so many interesting differences between anime and manga. Either way, I feel like you're getting a quality experience no matter what you choose to view. Also, I just have to take an extra second to appreciate this art in general. I've mentioned it a few times, but Jesus Christ, the quality of this art is insane. I'm putting up some shots now that I composed from my favorites while reading, and hopefully you can tell that Akihiro is just a master. He's a master not only of storytelling, but also just an artist. So well done. These environments are gorgeous. I can understand why these chapters take so long to be put out, because clearly the work put into this art is incredible. And I think it's safe to say that Kinema really tried their hardest to faithfully adapt this property. Almost to a fault at times, but they did restructure things and do things differently than the manga at points that I think sometimes worked and sometimes didn't. Either way, they tried their hardest and I can respect them for that, and in the end, it just created a really quality anime experience, and This manga has also been a joy to read. The chapters were just flying by, and I just can't wait to continue this story. Now here's the thing. I had originally planned on releasing this video yesterday and releasing the chapter 27 review today, as I said at the beginning. I will try to get that chapter 27 review out tomorrow because I said I would. But this week has been incredibly hectic for me. Just editing this video is probably going to take hours. So if worse comes to worse, I will make this video this week's Made in Abyss manga review just because I covered so much content. And then next week, next Wednesday, I will cover the chapter 27 review. I know that's going to be disappointing, but I'm just so busy right now. I'm going to try and make time for it, but you never know. I couldn't do this video yesterday. I have no idea what's going to happen tomorrow. I have to do all these reviews Friday through Sunday because I'm starting to think about wanting to cover all of the series I made first impressions for. So it's just hectic right now. Try to cut me some slack, but rest assured, at the very latest, the next review will be out next Wednesday. And I am keeping it on Wednesday because no other show has come out in the middle of the week that I feel like covering, so all of the series that I'm interested in are on the weekend, Friday through Sunday. So Wednesday is like the perfect middle day to cover Made in Abyss when I'm not busy. So guys, thank you so much for watching. Thank you for all the Made in Abyss support. Thank you for supporting my channel. Let me know what you thought about any of these differences, if you noticed them or if you didn't. Knowing you guys, you probably noticed these way before I did, but these are the things I wanted to talk about, so I did. This has been PhenomSage. Thank you again for watching, and have a great day.